Back in the 1960s, it was a worldwide craze to wring every last ounce of power and performance from your bike. This was the heyday of the cafe racer. Parts were stripped away to make the bikes lighter, and engines were tuned to provide more power, but that came at a cost. With that extra power came more heat, and seizures became commonplace. So various different companies developed a series of parts, what we refer to today as big finned parts. Everything from engine cases to exhaust clamps, in an effort to draw away as much heat from the engine as possible and improve cooling. The most successful of these companies, and so the most famous, was Webco. And for the last 6 months or so, Motone Customs have been quietly rolling out a range of Webco inspired parts, with the most recent introduction being the Webco inspired big finned exhaust clamps. Once again, these are made from aluminium, and Motone Customs have turned to their high pressure die casting methods to produce a clean, crisp and precisely fitting part that fits in very nicely with that cafe racing style. In fact, they are so clean and precise that comparing them with the original Triumph parts, they are a definite step up in quality. The original Triumph factory clamps are quite crudely cast from iron or steel, I'm not sure which, followed by a rather clumsy chrome plating. I'm not criticising this because this is what we get with just about every manufacturer. Cheap, mass-produced parts that do the job. But with these new clamps, Motone have taken a more authentic approach, with lightweight cast aluminium that has superior thermal conducting properties. They don't just look excellent, they should also aid with cooling. Now, things like this are a matter of taste. Some people are going to love them, some people are going to hate them. And although your average passerby isn't even going to notice that they're there, I think these are a must-have for your catalogue customiser or your cafe racer builder. Now, fitting is pretty easy, as long as you consider that, like all alloy parts, a little bit of care is needed. Clamps obviously come in a set of two, left and right, and each clamp comes in two halves, an upper and a lower part. Motone have taken care to label each individual part at the casting stage, so any element of doubt as to which part goes where has been removed. You have upper left and lower left, and upper right and lower right. In addition to your clamps, they also supply some aluminium spacers, and these are there mainly to ensure that these parts aren't damaged by over tightening. It's a simple procedure, and I'll quickly go through the fitting with you. Now, the only potential problem that you might encounter is the angle of the studs that Triumph have fitted at the factory. I'm not sure if this is a quality control issue, but the accuracy of the angles at which the holes have been drilled and tapped to accept the studs does seem to vary from one bike to another. In some cases they're splayed out slightly, in some cases they're pointing inwards, and if you're really lucky they'll be dead straight. Motone have taken these variances into account in making these parts, but in some cases firm pressure might be required to persuade the actual clamps to go on. It's not really a big issue, but it might take a couple of extra minutes of jiggling about to get them on. So just be aware of it. And the first thing that you need to do is remove those domed nuts that hold the originals in place. Once you've removed them, it's just gentle pressure with your fingers to prise the clamp as a whole forward. And once you've moved them a couple of inches down the pipe and off the studs, you can separate the two halves to remove the clamp. Next up, take two of your 4 spacers and slide them over your 2 studs. Push them back as far as they'll go, and then it's time to get your relevant clamp and assemble it around the header ready to put on. Now, at first these might seem like a bit of a Chinese puzzle because of the way that they're designed to interlock, but once you've worked it out, assemble them as they should be and then slide them onto the studs. Try and keep them both locked together if you can. This will help with putting them on, and if necessary use some firm pressure to push them onto the studs until they meet the exhaust header flange and the two spacers. It is important that you insert them on evenly, because if you get them at an angle, they will jam. It's one of those situations that becomes more clear when you're actually doing it. Now, if your studs are particularly bad, there is a method for getting these on, and I'll come to that a little bit later on. It's now time to fasten it all in place with those dome nuts. And to make sure that it's secured down evenly, this is what I recommend you do. Make sure that your clamp is pushed back as far as it will go, so that it's placed squarely onto the exhaust header flange and the two spacers. Then fasten on both nuts until you feel some resistance. From there, tighten them up between 1/4 and 1/2 turn each at a time. This ensures that you're tightening them down evenly. As the resistance increases, switch to your torque wrench and set it for 8 Newton meters. That's the factory torque measurement. And then continue 1/4 to 1/2 turn at a time, alternately between the two dome nuts. This should ensure that you fasten it down evenly and you're not tightening it more on one side than the other. And once you've reached your 8 Newton meters torque setting, check carefully by observing the flange all the way around and checking the mating surfaces between those two spacers and the engine, and those two spacers and the back of the clamps. Make sure that there are no gaps and that everything has been fastened down straight. Then it's time to move over to the clamp on the other side. That is basically exactly the same operation. Doing it this way will ensure that you don't cause any damage to the clamps and that you don't end up with one of these nuts working themselves loose as the bike's being run. Bearing in mind 8 Newton meters is a very low torque setting. Now, as you've just seen, I fitted the polished alloy versions to the T120, and they also do a raw straight out of the mould version, which is a look that some people go for. Now, for the Bobber Black, I obviously fitted the black powder coated version. Now, these were a pre-production example that Motone sent to me quite some time ago, and the holes on these are very slightly smaller than the actual production version. So on the right hand cylinder of the bobber, I did have some fitting problems because the studs were quite badly splayed. Now, in a situation like this, whatever you do, don't hit it with anything. Just persevere pushing it on with your fingers until you get enough thread exposed to actually thread your nuts on. And then use these nuts to sequentially pull the clamp down to its final position. Again, just by 1/2 turn per nut at a time. With the production version, this is probably not going to be necessary, but I think this represents worst case example that you're going to see. As I say, these were pre-production clamps. Now, once again, Motone Customs' dedication to providing the largest possible range of high quality custom parts for the liquid cooled Bonnevilles is starting to manifest itself here. I did have a look around to see if there were any other similar clamps on the market, and all I could really find were similar looking items which were basically just cosmetic collars that sort of fasten on in front of the existing Triumph clamp, or ridiculously, they replace the clamp, but it doesn't actually clamp the exhaust header onto the engine. I'm quite satisfied that there's nothing else of this quality or type on the market, and Motone tell me that somewhere on the not too distant horizon there's also going to be a set of black and polished contrast cut clamps. I've got my name down for one of these for the Bobber Black, so join the queue. I think what Motone are starting to achieve here now is a range of really classy coordinated parts which, like these clamps, will fit all of the liquid cooled Bonnevilles, and you can take or leave from that range whatever you like to achieve your own high quality, high prestige custom build that adds to the aesthetic qualities of the bike whilst upgrading the quality of some of its parts and enhancing its value. Once again, thanks for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it and you found it useful. If you have enjoyed it, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. As usual, I'll leave a link for these clamps in the video description down below. I will be back on Friday with a rather interesting alternative to the paddock stand for the bobber that I showed you a few weeks ago. So until then, ride safely and I'll see you soon.